Welcome to Rebecca Sounds Reveille. I am just amazed at how we experience different things in our lives and what they do to our body. In fact, a lot of times we are just so exhausted from the things that we do. We're stressed out. We are running from this place to that place because we live in a very fast-paced society. We have ATMs, drive-throughs, going to this job, picking up the children, going to their games or babysitting, and just moving from one area of life to another. And we do get tired from that. In fact, we get really tired from that. But there's some of us who do have something that makes us tired all the time, and it is known as chronic fatigue syndrome. And so today what we're going to do is we're going to talk about the effects of chronic fatigue syndrome, what it is, and what we can do to combat that. We have a guest today who is a British psychologist. He is author of a newly released book called The Intelligent Body and Reversing Chronic Fatigue and Pain from the Inside Out. This is really important. We do have an intelligent body, and reversing chronic pain and fatigue from the inside out is super important. Here with us today is author and British psychologist Kyle Davies, and I am just super excited to talk with him and get you the information that you need to combat this. Welcome, Kyle, to the show.
Thank you very much. It's an absolute pleasure to be here with you today. Thank you for having me.
I am super excited that you're here. You have got lots of information to share with the audience. I know that this is a topic that a lot of people do internet searches on to try and find different short-term things to combat their fatigue. And I also know that it can also be very difficult to diagnose.
It can be very, very tough to diagnose. In terms of when you get to the state where you have chronic fatigue syndrome, diagnosis is by exclusion. So what normally happens is people will experience what can be a diverse range of symptoms for a period of months. It can be fatigue, pain, brain fog, stomach and bowel complaints, depression, anxiety, memory problems. So there's a whole raft of symptoms that people can experience. Usually what happens is they'll go and see their doctor. The doctor will run a series of tests, and if those tests come back negative after a period of time, a diagnosis of either chronic fatigue syndrome, post-viral fatigue, adrenal fatigue, or fibromyalgia, or in this country and Australia, ME. So there's a range of diagnoses that are given. From my perspective, they're kind of the same thing. I know that there are some people with fibromyalgia and some people with chronic fatigue syndrome that like to suggest that their particular condition is unique and the two are not the same. The way I approach it is I'm looking at them as kind of largely the same, because it's not that they're exactly the same. I think the symptoms can be quite different, but they're generally umbrella terms in much the same way as anxiety and depression are umbrella terms for a whole series of symptoms that people experience. chronic fatigue syndrome and fibromyalgia are also these big umbrella terms. So quite a diverse range of symptoms. People can be mildly affected so that they can still go to work. And then there are people that are very severely affected who can't work. And I've treated people, worked with people that have been ill for sort of 30 or 40 years and haven't worked for kind of 20 or 30 years. Oh. And I work with people that are still, you know, at work and are just about able to function, but only just. So yeah, it's what we seem to be experiencing are more and more instances of, I guess, these types of symptoms. As I say, when the symptoms cluster, those diagnoses of CFS and fibro are given. However, for lots of people, there are things like headaches, migraines, there's general fatigue, malaise, you know, aches, pains that aren't diagnosed. So, you know, and of course, we all have symptoms at some level. And if your symptoms are acute, you know, if you have a couple of days or if you have a headache, then it isn't a problem. But if your symptoms become chronic, if you've had a headache for a week, or if you can't sleep and it's been kind of 2 weeks, or you just don't feel yourself, you're feeling off kilter, and this has been going on for kind of weeks or months, then there's a bit of an issue.
That's very interesting. And, you know, I know that everybody experiences fatigue at some time, but these particular symptoms, and like you said, they can be mild, but they can also be so severe as you've described. It kind of is baffling. And so what's very interesting to me is that you're a psychologist who has written this book, and most people go to their general MD. So I'm wondering, is this something that is also in the DSM manual as a mental illness? Or is
that is a good question, and this brings us to one of the kind of the key issues as I see it. So my work is mind and body all as one. I think that in my experience, we often see the two as separate. And what kind of is interesting to me about that is that the idea of them being separate comes from a very, very old assumption about the world. So in the olden days, when science was just kind of starting out, they tried to understand the mind and the brain and God and where we all fit together. And the idea was that, well, animals, plants, and the human body is they're a bit like machines. The universe is a kind of this random machine to a certain extent. But because those early scientists were Christians, and man was made in God's image, there was a need to find some way of connecting man with God. So this was where the idea of soul and psyche came from. So going way back to the kind of ancient Greeks, the word psyche meant soul. But as we came into modern science, the idea of psyche and psyche became more related to mind. Now, in those early scientists, the kind of idea was, well, the mind is kind of ethereal, it's non-material, it connects the soul and the body to a certain extent, and that's what's different between man and everything else. So the animals, they're just machines. The body is kind of a machine. You can take it apart, the arms and the legs and the toes and the fingers, but the mind you can't split apart, and it's non-material. So that's what connects us with God. Now, since those early scientists, there's kind of been a move in science, I guess, to take God out of the equation altogether. And what we've been left with is where there was something of a spiritual aspect to mind that connected with soul. The mind just became this, well, we're not quite sure, but it was a worldview assumption back in those days. It was a way of trying to explain who we might be. And what we've got is we still have it as a hangover, as you know, as far as I can tell. So people still entertain that idea that body and mind are split and are separate. But in truth, and I think what we see from science is that they are one. Now, the best example of showing that they are one is when we look at stress. So a body could be in a state of stress. There's a couple of crucial things. One, whether we are aware of it or not. And two, I think what's really interesting is that there's a variety of different things that can trigger the stress response in the body in exactly the same way. So you could have a car accident, you could fall down a flight of stairs, you could have a bad case of flu, you could lose a job. The stress response in the body is exactly the same. So I think what we see there is whether you have a physical injury, whether you have an illness where something is coming in and invading your body, or some emotional trauma, the stress response is the same. And I think that's absolutely crucial. So in terms of, therefore, well, what causes symptoms, I think we're beginning to see that stress plays this big role in our lives. So the little simple metaphor that I like to use is that we have a stress bucket inside. And when all of these things go in our stress bucket, there's our emotion. There can be, if we're boozing too heavily, if we have a bad diet, if we're not sleeping, if we're over exercising, there can be a whole range of things. It could be you've had a car crash. It could be you've lost a job. But all of these things will go in the stress bucket. And when that stress bucket gets full, essentially the body begins to go into a sort of an overdrive. And at that point, symptoms ensue. So that's the sort of the simple kind of idea. There's a bit of a chain reaction, as I see it, is that as that stress bucket gets fuller and fuller, and I think the majority of what's in that is our emotion, and we can talk more about that later. But as that stress bucket gets fuller and fuller, when it's full, it results in a rewiring of certain parts of the brain, and that rewiring leads to, therefore, sort of dysfunction, I suppose, within the immune system, the autonomic nervous system, and the endocrine system. And when those systems are out of whack, then we experience the whole range of symptoms of fatigue, of pain, and all these sorts of things. And of course, what we're used to with healthcare is that we very often either try to work directly on the symptoms themselves, or we try to do something to balance our systems. And what I'm suggesting is, well, we've got this chain reaction here where we've got a full stress bucket, and that's triggering all of these events in the body and in the brain, and that's resulting in symptoms. So the first thing I'd said about stress was that our body can be in a state of stress and we're not aware of it. And I think that's a really very important point. And just to kind of give an example of that, I remember reading a great book years ago called Healing Without Prozac and Freud by a doctor called David Schreiber, I think his name was. And he was trying to look at the brain and the body and their response under stress. So what he was doing was showing people films that were disturbing. And he was looking at the activity of the brain, blood pressure, and heart rate. And he said he had one lady in, and she was in the lab, and she was watching this video. And as she was watching the video, he said her heart rate was kind of sky high and her blood pressure was going mad and the activity of her emotional brain was kind of off the charts. He was thinking, oh my God, this lady is in a deep state of stress. So he went into the lab and he said, are you okay? Do you want me to turn this film off? And she looked at him with an element of surprise and said, oh no, I'm perfectly fine. I'm quite happy watching this. Now, what he said was, well, this lady's body was in a state of stress, but she was tuned out. Now, what I would say was that is the case. But if that happens over time, because we can tune out to what is going on inside, over time, she's likely to get ill. Because if her body's producing stress, then, and she's not aware that it's producing stress, then her stress bucket will get fuller and fuller until it tips over, and then she begins to have symptoms. So I think those are the two crucial things for me about stress: is that it brings together mind and body. So for me, I don't look at things in terms of mental illness and physical illness. I see it all kind of as one. Yeah, you can have things wrong with your brain and things wrong with your legs, but I think that ultimately it's much more useful if we look at us as one system. That everything affects kind of everything else. So that's the first thing. I said the second important thing is that it's, you know, and there's a chapter in my book which is called it's not the stress you feel, it's the stress you don't. I think very often today we have this idea of stress is an uncomfortable, agitated feeling we have if the boss overloads us, or if my wife is trying to have me do shopping, look after the kids, and all these other things. Whereas I would say that's an emotional feeling of overload or overwhelm. It's a sensation that we're aware of, and whilst if we allow ourselves to engage with that, then it may well be that our body goes into a state of stress. But ultimately, I think what people are talking about is an emotional feeling, whereas the stress response is something that can be quite different. So I think knowing that your body can be in a state of stress, even when you're tuned out from it, I think is quite important. And, you know, particularly because, you know, when I'm working with people with symptoms, often they'll say to me, yeah, but I didn't feel stressed. And my answer is, well, that's kind of the point really, is that when you begin to tune out your body, essentially what your body is doing is trying to get your attention, because that's what symptoms are. And I guess it's one of those things that we have, because we sort of view our body as this machine. We often don't view symptoms as something that's helpful for us, as a tap on the shoulder, just to say there's something you need to look at here. I think, you know, we're so used to reaching for the pills and potions. You know, if you have a bad head, you're reaching for the pills, aren't you, to try to get rid of that bad head.
Right.
And as you were saying at the start, we have these fast-paced lives where we don't have time for symptoms. Symptoms are just kind of these evil invaders that get in the way.
Yes.
And I think really what I try to do is preach the message that a symptom is a useful messenger. It's your body's way of trying to get your attention, to say that there's something not quite right. And again, because we have this mechanistic sort of view of life, I think that we kind of externalize. So we often think that, well, I've got symptoms because something is happening to me. And whereas, you know, if you're walking down the road and a stone pops in your shoe, when you have a sharp pain in your foot, you know that symptom of pain, it's your body is serving you. It's trying to tell you that, well, you need to do something. You need to take your shoe off and take that stone out, which, of course, you do. When our symptoms become more severe, though, we're looking for a doctor to do something, and we sort of forget that actually we're pretty good at sorting ourselves out to a certain extent. I think people, in many instances, intuitively know, you know, when they have symptoms. I think people intuitively know often that there's something that's not quite right, and I think they often know what it is. But I think because medicine is so detached from that model, that where we look at your whole life, you know, medicine is looking at, right, well, if you've got a bad toe, we'll just look at your toe.
Right.
We're not going to look at what's going on in your life or the rest of your body. It's just specifically, let's look at that bad toe. Now, again, I don't want to knock medicine, because it does some fantastic things. And if your symptoms are acute, if you've got a broken toe, then medicine is brilliant. Or if you've got an infection, medicine is brilliant. But if those symptoms are chronic, then it tends to be the case that medicine doesn't really have an answer, and because it then doesn't look at the whole of you. So, as I say, I believe, in my experience, is that people kind of intuitively know if there's something not quite right, and sometimes they kind of have a sense that, you know, if they've had that headache for a few days, that they know there's something not quite right in their life, even if they don't know what to do about it. But I think often people know that. Or if they have a lot of fatigue symptoms, it's not normal fatigue. Because again, as you said at the start of the show, there's a difference between a healthy fatigue and groggy symptoms. And you know, if you have a healthy tired, it's your body saying you need to sleep. But if you're having groggy symptoms, you're a groggy fatigue type symptom, then your body's trying to tell you something else, trying to tell you that something is wrong. And again, from my perspective, it's telling you that there's something in that stress bucket, or too many things in that stress bucket that we've sort of missed. And a lot of this, there's increasing interest now, both in the US and in the UK, into what they call adverse childhood experiences, which is kind of stressful events or trauma that people experience in childhood. And there's been a lot of research which has been tracking through and basically says, to put it in a nutshell, says, well, the more adverse childhood experiences you have, the greater the chance you've got of developing something chronic, from depression to kind of cancer in later life. Now, that kind of paints a bit of a gloomy picture, because you're thinking, oh crap, well, if this has happened to me as a kid, what am I supposed to do now?
Right.
Well, for me, I think it doesn't have to be gloomy. I think what happens is that we learn to suppress our emotional feedback. I think as children, we, from the way I define our emotion in a way of trying to be simple, saying, well, our emotion is feedback about the way we are interacting with our environment. So it's not that my environment or this person is causing me to feel something. It comes from the meaning that I imprint upon life, and also the way I am kind of interacting with life. So my emotion is about me, and it comes from inside of me. So it is all about me. But as a child, you're still going to have those emotions. But if you don't know what to do about it, or even if they become overwhelming, we kind of unconsciously split apart from them and begin to block them. So a bit like that lady in that experiment with watching that film, where she wasn't aware that her heart rate and blood pressure were kind of going mad. I think as children, we kind of learn that's the thing to do in order just to kind of cope with life. And I don't think it, in terms of what we experience as children, I don't think it doesn't need to be trauma in the sense of, you were abused, or your parents broke up, or you had an alcoholic parent, or you were bullied. I don't think it needs to be anything as severe as that. I think that, a selection of reasonably mild things, even if you're just trying to fit in as a kid, that can result in you ending, you burying your own feelings. Sure. So this is the kind of experience that I have, is what I see when I track it back. If I'm working with somebody with chronic fatigue syndrome or fibromyalgia, they may say to me that they were diagnosed last year with CFS. But when we track back symptoms, it's very often the case that their symptoms will track back to when they were quite young, and they may say, well, when I was 8 or 9, I was off school with a bad stomach, or when I was 14, I seem to have headaches. So it's very often it kind of starts there. And for some people, there's some obvious traumas. For others, they're not obvious traumas, but they've gone through a period in their life where in order to cope, in order to deal with it, in order to kind of get by, they've learned to bury their true feelings, their true self. So what I do is I believe that, well, just because they buried it back then, the body sends the symptoms in order to let them know that's what they're doing, and they're still doing it now. And the more severe symptoms are just the body shouting a bit louder. So it's not that the condition is something that we need to fret about even more. It's just actually what my body is doing is just shouting louder and louder and louder. So it's almost a bit like, if you have a bottle of wine, you may have a bad head in the morning. If you have 3 bottles of wine, you may have a screaming bad head. It's still a hangover. It's still kind of the same thing. Still your body saying, well, you drank too much wine last night, you naughty girl. Obviously not me, you. Guys, I'm really waffling out it. So the issue is that as long as we can get back in touch and uncover our sort of our true self, as I would say, and then get back in touch with those feelings and our, the awareness of our body and how it feels and the direction it's trying to send us. When we begin to do that, then we begin to flow again. And it's almost as if our body doesn't have to send symptoms. When we're in touch with our emotional feelings, we're letting them flow and we're allowing ourselves to be guided.
Right. And then
So,
our intuitiveness is able to just say, okay, there's something going on, before it's gotten to the point where our symptoms are shouting out saying, hey, we've got something that we need to deal with here.
yeah.
You know,
And I think this is, sorry, go on.
oh, it's just very interesting. And many people have heard the term, your perception is your reality. And they have sort of thought, well, that's sort of off or in some odd thinking or whatever. But if you really think about it, what you experience and the perception that you get from that is your reality, and then your body is reacting to it, whether you suppress those emotional or visual images. And then even if it's at the conscious level, you're still reacting to it. But what I find very fascinating is the fact that you talked about the woman who was sitting there and had no idea she was under stress. And so being in that position where we have this view based on our trauma or significant experience that we've had, that we really are reacting to it, whether it's on the surface or not.
Yeah. I think that one of the tricky things I think about all of this is that we're a very thinking orientated culture, and my sense is that people believe that they can change more with conscious thinking than they actually can. As this is my view. And we've had an entire industry based on the idea, well, change the way you think, change the way you feel, change your life. And there's a couple of important things in there for me. I think the first thing is that what we know now from science is that our emotional processing occurs at a far higher speed than our cognitive processing. So what happens is our emotion tends to affect our thinking much more than the other way around. So our emotion, it arises, and it's our heart is involved because we've got neurons in our heart. Our gut is involved because we've got neurons in our gut. So the non-thinking part of the brain, the heart and the gut, are talking to each other, and it's that flow that results in the kind of the feelings that we have, if we allow ourselves to have those feelings. Mm-hmm. And that happens outside of our conscious awareness. So emotion is a non-conscious process. And without wanting to get too academic about it, emotion and feeling are slightly different. So emotion is supposed to trigger feelings. And this is the idea. We can block feelings, but even if we block feelings, emotions are still there. And this is why we get that rewiring that takes place in the brain, and therefore we get that chain reaction that takes place, as I talked about earlier. So I think for me, there is the idea, just as you said, that we are our reality is something that's constantly shifting. It comes from inside of us. It's not that it's fixed out there. It's not that football game actually means something. It's that I'm imprinting meaning upon it, and the emotional experience I have arises as a result of that. However, I can't just simply consciously change the feeling responses that I have by changing my thinking. Uh-huh. And I mean, one of the things that resulted in me and my colleagues arriving at that was that one of the standard treatments for chronic fatigue and fibromyalgia is cognitive behavioral therapy. And that works from the standpoint. And even though I'm sure, obviously it's thought of very highly in both the US and the UK, it's kind of the gold standard treatment over here. I would have to say I've done a bit of training in it. I've tried it myself, and I was never a fan. But one of the things that was interesting to me was it didn't seem to work for people with CFS and fibro and those sorts of problems. But what its underpinning theory that is that emotion follows thinking. So what it does is it tries to have people consciously change their thoughts. If you have negative thoughts, let's change them to positive thoughts. And for me, it just doesn't make any sense at all, because our thinking is just something that kind of happens. I don't think we can control it. In as much as well, I don't, in this moment and the next, I can't control the emotional feelings that I have. Now, over time, I can direct my feelings, because my awareness, my attention, my behavior today all affects the emotions that I will experience tomorrow and the day after. But in this moment, whatever I'm doing, I can't control as such what emotional feelings I have. And as much as I can't really control my thinking. I do know that my emotion will affect my thinking. So if there's a lot of negative emotion in my stress bucket, my thinking will be negative, and there'll be lots of thinking that's going on, because the more emotion, the more thinking. And again, we get caught up in that, what I think is a misguided trap of believing that, well, what I need to do is challenge my thinking or change my thinking.
Right.
So a lot of what I do is actually getting people out of their heads, and we need to just leave your thinking be, because thinking just kind of happens. We know that if there's a lot of it, it will be influenced by the emotion that's present in your stress bucket. So what we need to do is get back to feeling and accepting how we feel. A lot of the time, what we're doing is we're resisting our emotion. We're making judgments about our emotions. We're trying to find meaning in our emotion. And all of those things, there's that sort of awful irony with that some emotion is produced, the thinking centers of the brain become active, and we start thinking, and we start analyzing, we start resisting, we start trying to solve, we're trying to find meaning. What does this mean about me, the fact that I've got these emotions? All of those things just result in more emotion, and then we get stuck in a loop. And often, if people experience symptoms, that exacerbates their symptoms. So it's a funny one in a way. It's that, yes, our reality, our conception of reality comes from inside of us. We can't necessarily control that, but we can guide it. I don't think we need to control it. I think if we allow life to be simple, and we get back in touch with how we feel and allow how we feel to be okay, then life flows much more. I think much of the time, the suffering that we experience is we just overanalyze everything, and then we resist, and then suffering arises as a result of that.
I absolutely have to agree with you. And I think it's very interesting that you talk about feeling resistance, because I think in many cultures, there are certain feelings that they're people within that culture that are told that they are not to be okay with certain feelings. And we have these feelings because that's how we're wired, or we wouldn't feel them. So I have to say that, letting people know that their feelings are okay is super important, instead of suppressing them. And there, of course, is certain ways to handle that. I mean, you don't want to say it's okay to do something out of anger that's extremely violent.
I think that's a great point. I think there's two things from that. I think that there needs to be seen to be a difference between feelings and behavior.
Yes.
So I would say, if your body sends you out, if my body sends me anger, that's my anger. It's about me. My emotion is guiding me back to my true self. It's inviting me to act in an authentic way in this context. It's not about Bob Smith over there as such. It may be my interaction with Bob Smith has resulted in my true self sending me this anger, but it's guiding me back to me. Now, what I need to do there is accept the fact, allow the fact that I feel this anger, realize that it's my anger, it's about me, and it's inviting me to act in an authentic way. So whatever action I take in relation to Bob Smith, it's not about him. So there's no judgment of Bob Smith. I'm not resisting my anger. I'm allowing it to be there. I know that what I need to do is just be as close to my true self as I can in that context. Mm-hmm. If I do that, the chances are my behavior will be constructive. So I'm not going to be acting out in a very angry way. So I think keeping that kind of clear blue water between our emotion and our behavior is important. But I think it's a really important point, that idea of allowing everything we feel to be okay. There were two really profound moments in my life, kind of on this journey with doing this work. And one was having that realization that everything I feel is okay. And I think one of the reasons that we resist negative feelings, probably the reason why we refer to it as emotional pain, is because the same areas of the brain light up with our emotion or our uncomfortable emotion as do with physical pain. So I think, and I say that's probably why we say we call it pain, even if it's a feeling or a physical thing, So I think the thing with that is that we have a natural tendency as human beings to want to get away from or resist anything that causes a level of discomfort. So the idea of allowing something to be okay seems a bit weird. It almost seems to go against our instinct. But I think to a certain extent, kind of mastery of life comes from that. So kind of two profound moments for me were, one, having that realization, everything I feel is okay. And the second thing, which may seem like the same, but is slightly different, is that what I feel is not a problem. Therefore, I don't need to solve it. What I found in my personal experience, and I've seen this with hundreds of people that I've worked with, is that when we have a negative feeling or an uncomfortable feeling, there's this kind of buzz that something is wrong. There's a problem. I'm not right. I need to be fixed. And the tension that ensues from just that notion that something is not right can be enormous, and there can be suffering that arises simply from that fact of, oh my God, there's something not right. There is a problem. It's kind of the alarm bells are going, bap, 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 I've got to solve this problem. So having that sense of, do you know what? What I feel is not a problem. What I feel never needs to be solved. Now, it could be that what I'm feeling is inviting me to act authentically in this particular situation here. But the emotion itself doesn't need to be solved. I don't need to find any meaning of it. It doesn't mean I'm a this person or I'm a that person, I'm weak or I'm stupid or I'm foolish. It doesn't have to mean anything. All I need to do is just be in that space of, well, this is there. This emotion is there. If I sense I know what action I want to take, I can take it. But if I don't know what to do, that's fine.
Right.
I can just allow everything I feel to be okay and know that this is not a problem. I don't have to solve this feeling. And those two things were absolutely profound for me in terms of just making life easier, because that's ultimately what we want. We want to be able to, we want to flow through life. We want to get out of our heads, align with what I would call our true self and flow a little bit more.
Yes, I have to agree. And I like what you said about utilizing our emotions in a constructive way, because I think that there is a lot to that in how we handle our emotions behaviorally. And if we can use them in a way that is constructive, is positive, and is healthy, it seems like, as you've said, the second profound thing that you had talked about in not having to address those, that, just the fact that they're there, you don't have to solve them. I think that when we're responding in a constructive way, we don't necessarily have to find a solution to that particular emotion. It may just sort of work itself out and you can move through the situation.
Yeah, I think that there's the point as well, and without wanting to add too many layers of theory, our emotional, our level of vibration, if you will, varies on a spectrum from kind of low to high. And when we're what I would call in a more of a higher vibrational space,
Okay.
a higher level, we're more connected with our true self. The more our vibration drops, if you will, the more we become disconnected from our true self. Now, what happens with those two spaces is that the more we're in this higher consciousness space, the more our head is clear, the more we feel like life is flowing, good things happen, the choices we make seem to go well for us. we feel all our emotions. It doesn't mean we're happy all the time, but there's a greater sense of being at peace. And the emotions we do feel, they're a little bit milder. As we drop down, and we do fluctuate on this kind of spectrum every day, across the day we can fluctuate. But if we drop down quite a lot, what tends to happen is that we experience lots of emotion and probably lots of anger and fear. Our head is very cluttered. Things just seem to kind of go wrong for us. The choices we make go wrong. We often can't decide because our head is just so busy. But what happens as well is we drop down that spectrum is our perceptions of life and our perceptions of ourselves become more negative. So this is, again, going back to what you said earlier about we are kind of conceiving of our reality. So my sense of it is that my perception of my reality in this moment is more a reflection of where I am on my spectrum of vibrational consciousness than it is a reflection of a true reality. One of the difficult things, I think, is getting around the idea that there's not a single reality out there. It's constantly shifting. And it's shifting depending on, as I say, where we are vibrating. So knowing that, if I'm down here on the spectrum, if a work colleague leaves the milk out of the fridge at the office, I could experience intense rage. If I'm up here on the spectrum, I'm kind of connected and at peace, I may experience no emotion at all. The same colleague leaving the milk out of the office fridge, So I think having that knowledge that, yes, my emotions are rising as a result of my interaction with my environment. They also are affected by where I am on this vibrational spectrum. So again, it's that idea that my emotions are not necessarily caused by what's going on in life. Now, again, latching that onto your point about behavior, when we can bring our emotion back to us, and if I know, I'm feeling off kilter today, I don't feel right, I know I've dropped down the spectrum, I'm not quite right, my head's busy, I know that I can ride that out, because my sense of it, our natural tendency is to be connected in a sort of a more spiritual space, and to be aligned with our true self. So we naturally gravitate more up towards this higher end of the spectrum. But we still, as I say, we do kind of, we do bob and weave around, and we can drop down. But I could be down there, I could not know why, I could feel off kilter, I could feel not good, my head's busy, I feel all a bit churned up inside. I know that my emotional responses will be erratic. So things can happen out there and I'll feel, huge amounts of anger or huge amounts of fear. What I need to know is that's about me, and my perception is being affected, but it's not that this is some terrible thing out here. And I think that's one of the pitfalls that many people fall into, is that they believe that life directly causes how they feel. And therefore something small is going on out here. And I think the other thing is when people are lower on that spectrum and they don't feel very good, again, it's that thing of something must be wrong. And people are immediately looking outside of themselves. And then there must be something wrong with my partner. There must be something wrong with my job. There must be, and people frantically try to fix things. But in many instances, it isn't that anything needs fixing. It's just that we're kind of maybe have slipped down that spectrum. Now, if the stress bucket gets full, we can slip down that spectrum, but sometimes we're just kind of moving around. So I think it just all comes back to that idea that our reality is kind of conceived of inside of us. Yes, you can't extricate us from our environment. Yes, we're influenced by the energy of life, and we all exert an energy. We're transmitting energy and receiving it. So we're picking up on the energy of life, and that affects our vibration, that affects how we feel. There are things going on at the moment. There's things in the US, there's things in the UK. Life feels incredibly intense. We're going through a consciousness shift. So a lot of people are feeling the energies, that intensity that is happening as we go through this kind of shift. So that affects kind of, sorry, go on.
Oh, I just think that you have brought it full circle in explaining for some who say, well, why doesn't that person react the way everybody else is reacting to some major event. And that goes back to what you were talking about with the stress bucket. If one has a different amount of stress in their stress bucket versus someone else, they're going to react very differently. Some may have a major emotion, and some, as you have said, may not have an emotion at all. I think that that's really very interesting, and it gives us an understanding as to why, when we're looking at someone else, that they may not be on the same emotional page as we are over a certain event.
Yeah, absolutely. I think this is it. And when we can be in that space of, well, everything I feel is okay, I don't have to normalize how I feel. I don't have to check what I feel is the same as what you feel, because my reality, my feelings are going to be different, because I could feel differently next week. Depends what's in my stress bucket, depends on where I am on this vibrational spectrum. All of those things are going to affect my internal experience. As I say, that's not necessarily something I can directly control. I can be aware of it and I can direct it to a certain extent, but I can't always control it. I certainly can't control it by thinking about it. I think it's important for us to have that realization that, yeah, my feeling experience arises from inside of me. So I need to come back to me rather than necessarily getting out there and trying to fix life. It's all, it's kind of our journey, isn't it? This is the thing from that spiritual perspective.
Yes.
We're all walking our own path. And, the fantastic thing about being human is we have feelings. And our feelings are about us. They're guiding us. They're our job to kind of work through, to understand. And the only way we can do that is by allowing ourselves to be in the body rather than up in our head thinking all the time. Get in the body, feel, and process. If there's action that we need to take, then take that action. If not, just allow ourselves to feel whatever it is we feel.
I love it. I love it. I know that you have so much research that you have done and have really focused a lot on being able to reverse chronic fatigue from the inside and out with your book, The Intelligent Body. And yes, thank you very much.
Book plug.
I think this is a really important topic, and it will help our audience and others, that your readers, to address a lot of different things that will be applicable, because as you said, that we react and respond the same to different types of trauma. So I think that your tool is going to be extremely helpful in many ways, and it will change the lives of many people. And I'm extremely excited to see just how much more work that you're going to do and the discoveries that you're going to make, because everything that you have said makes a lot of sense, and I think you're spot on.
Well, that's very nice of you to say. Just in reference to obviously everything that I've said is all in the book. The book is designed to be, it kind of lays all this bare, really. So there's chunks of theory, there's chunks where there's exercises, but it's designed to be very easy to read, and something you can read all at once, or you can dip into and dip out of. But yeah.
Excellent.
Please do buy it, listeners.
I'm sorry?
I said, please do buy it, everyone that's watching this.
Yes. So I would like you to tell our audience how to get in contact with you, purchase your book, and where, your website, where they can obtain a copy of your book, and so on and so forth. I think what you have said, while you may be in the UK, I think it's very applicable to us here. We are wired that way, and I don't think that there is any difference in responses. I have shared the same viewpoint for many, many years, and myself working with victims have found that the response has been the same, and I support 100% everything that you've said. So for the audience, to get a copy of your book, learn more, and be able to also follow you so that they can watch the research that you're doing, Oh, and before I forget, are you available to do Skype sessions
I
for?
do Skype. So even though I'm based in the UK, probably 60 to 70% of my clients are US based. So I do a lot of work via Skype. I do have colleagues. I have a colleague who is based in Washington, DC. So she does in-person sessions as well and can do Skype sessions.
Fantastic.
The book is available Amazon, Barnes and Noble, should be at all good booksellers. It's published by W. Norton, so they're a fairly big name in the world of health. My website is kyledavies.net, KYLEDAVIES.net. The work is called Energy Flow Coaching. We're in the process of putting together an energyflowcoaching.com website, so I'm hoping that will be up and running in the next couple of months.
Excellent.
And yes, but all good book retailers should hold the book. You're probably better off going to Amazon, because it's available in hard copy and Kindle and audiobook as well. And I know it's a bit cheaper on Amazon than it is in other bookstores. I'm on Facebook as Kyle L. Davis. I think on my I'm Kyle Davis EFC on Facebook, but I'm on Twitter as well. And if you want to find me on Facebook as Kyle Davis, which is facebook.com, Kyle Davis EFC for Energy Flow Coaching. There is chapter 2 was published in the magazine The Neuropsychotherapist. That's a big one, isn't it? So
Excellent.
Chapter 2. So, and I've put that up on Facebook. So if you want to check me out on Facebook, that is up on my Facebook page.
Excellent. Thank you so much for your time today. You have been
Thanks for having me.
Oh yes, you have absolutely been an enormous encouragement because of the understanding that you have had and have provided, so that our audience can learn more, can begin to reverse things. I think your work is just absolutely phenomenal. So thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
And I want to thank all of you out there for watching. We really appreciate the opportunity to share with you important messages where we need to wake up to. This is one particular area, and I think that Dr. Davies' book is going to really make a difference for those of you who are suffering chronic fatigue syndrome or fibromyalgia or fatigue, or have had any other type of stresses too, because as he was saying, we do react and respond to the stresses the same way. So go ahead and click on his site, click on Amazon, get a copy of his book. You definitely want to get this in the hands for yourself, for your loved ones, and others out there. So please share this on social media with your friends, family, colleagues, all of those. Thank you so much for watching. This is Rebecca Sounds Reveille. We'll see you again soon.